When I was in prison, I knew a song of Rakić that lasted 45 minutes. And that's how I counted in the isolation the hours, because we had no light and no contact, nothing. So I would sing this song 10 times per day, and that's how I use it as a way to keep connection with the time and the reality.
Ήτανε μια μέρα κοινή, θα πήγαινα στη σχολή.
I think my mother or my aunt took me to the school bus, and instead we saw a tank. For me, it was a big shock. I didn't know, and they said, you know, how quickly we'll go back home.
I was supposed to go to the first gymnasium excursion. So it was very early in the morning. I had to take my food and go on the excursion. And I was very happy and very anxious about that. It was 21st of April. And then my father wakes me up crying. It was the first time I saw my dad crying. He was crying, tears were coming out. And he said, wake up, wake up. The military is here. The junta is here. And he tried to explain to me what was happening. Things are very dangerous. Please be careful. And I had a fight with him. And I said, I'm not going to lose the excursion. And I take my bag and I get out of the house and I walk about 100 meters. And there is a soldier on the roof. I said, where are you going, little girl? Get back into your house. It was the first time in my life that I saw somebody with an arm in the middle of my neighborhood, crying out loud, go back, go back. I started running, but I didn't run to the house. I ran towards the buses, and I arrived there. This is something I will never forget in my life. Instead of seeing the buses of the school, I saw tanks. With their cannons like this, I paralyzed. I paralyzed. Nothing else was a silence and the tanks.
Day of the coup, 21st of April, 1967. The American ambassador is in his office and he's writing a cable. And the CIA station chief, Jack Maury, comes in. He's actually dressed in a military uniform from the war in order to go through the roadblocks in the streets. And he asks the ambassador, what are you writing there? He says, oh yeah, I'm writing a cable, and the title of the cable is The Death of the Rape of Greek Democracy. And the CIA station chief says, what do you mean a rape of Greek democracy? How can you rape a whore?
Greece actually is the country of Europe where the Cold War started. The dogma of the American President Truman, which was that we need to help, to assist the countries which were threatened by the communists, was elaborated for Greeks in 1946. So the history of the Greek state after 1944, 45, 46, until the end of the dictatorship in 1974, 30 years after, should be seen as the strongest laboratory of the Cold War conflict.
If you just read the newspapers one day before the coup, the newspapers, they were declaring it's coming. Everybody knew it was coming. Even in the military, there were the colonels and the captains that were trying to catch one another. Don't ever forget, there was a king here.
100 years ago,
There was a kingdom, a king that tried to manipulate things and tried to keep the bourgeoisie in power. So it was not something spontaneous.
Mi smo tada imali jednog vrsnog ambasadora, Mihajla Javorskog, izvanredno obaveštenog, koji je imao veoma dobre kontakte sa svima u grčkom političkom životu, pa između ostalih i sa Andreasom Papandreom. I u 2 razgovora, samo nekoliko nedelja pred zbacivanje civilne vlade i uvođenje vojne hunte, naš ambasador je upozorio Papandreova kako se sprema hunta. Kada Papandreou kaže u svom odgovoru da je razgovarao sa američkim ambasadorom Talbotom u Atini, naš ambasador kaže State Department drži jednu srednju, umerenu liniju zajedno sa kraljem, međutim CIA i Pentagon rade po sopstvenim planovima, van znanja State Departmenta i neposredno sarađuju sa onima koji će sutra činiti vojnu huntu.
After the Civil War, the Greek military was very close to the Americans. And the Greek military was always the one that kept the system quiet, let's say. They were the ones who were used against the communists, make sure the left would not come to power. Because Greece was part of the Western Alliance, this is a Cold War environment, and therefore intelligence and military are very critical for the establishment, for the system. And they're always very, very close to the US. They are funded by the US, they are trained by the US, they have very close relations with the US.
Trumanova doktrina je praktično bio onaj izraz spoljno-političke strategije SAD u kome je zbog strateških interesa Sjedinjenih Američkih Država žrtvovana demokratija u Grčkoj i pod plaštom američke demokratije osnovani su svi logori u Grčkoj u kojima su državni pripadnici opozicije. Hiljade, desetine hiljada ljudi na 29 ostrva su u ime demokratije žrtvovani i stavljeni u koncentracione zatvore poput onoga koji smo mi imali na Golom otoku u Jugoslaviji.
Na robiji sam bio ukupno 16 godina. 3 puta sam osuđivan na smrt. Godinama sam čekao dan izvršenja smrtne kazne. Za mene je svaki dan dan borbe za slobodu čoveka.
In the beginning, there were small groups of trying to do something. They were putting bombs here and there, not bombs to kill people, but just to alert the public that something very wrong was going on. Most of the groups were easily and quickly found and dismantled, and the people, they were thrown to prison.
Η αστυνομία τότε είχε φακέλους κατά σχολή. Ήξερε λοιπόν περίπου ποιοι φοιτητές θα οργανώσουν αντίσταση. και υποχρεώθηκα εγώ να βγω στην παρανομία. Ατυχώς, ένα βράδυ που μετακινήθηκα με το τρόλεϊ, έπεσα απάνω σε ένα αστυνομικό που με γνώριζε και με συνέλαβε. Ήμουνα μάλλον ο πρώτος που πιάστηκα από την οργάνωση. Και αυτό το πλήρωσα διότι θέλανε να ξεκινήσουν να μάθουνε.
Ούτω και τας παραμονάς της 21ης Απριλίου με τον ελληνικών λαών επιβάτην και με ένα πλήρωμα το οποίο είχε δηλιάσει προ των περιστάσεων τας οποίας αντιμετώπιζε.
Κοιτάξτε, όταν σε συλλαμβάνουνε, αυτό που θέλει ασφάλεια είναι να χάσεις το ηθικό σου. Άρα λοιπόν, από αμέσως αρχίζει ένας ξυλοδαρμός με διάφορους τρόπους, έτσι που να καταλάβεις ότι εδώ δεν τα βγάνω πέρα. Και όντως αυτό, εντάξει, δεν υπάρχει άνθρωπος που να μην φοβάται, λογικό είναι αυτό. Αφού λοιπόν δεν έπιασε αυτό από την πόρτα μέχρι τον 4ο όροφο που με χτυπάγανε, εγώ δεν μίλησα, με βάλανε σε ένα γραφείο και μου λένε τώρα τι θα κάνεις. Εγώ δεν μίλαγα. Που μένεις, δεν ξέρω που μένω. Και αρχίζει τότε η φάλαγγα. Σε δένουν απάνω σε ένα μπάγκο, σε ακινητοποιούνε και σε χτυπάνε στα πέλματα, εδώ στα πόδια και στο στήθος.
Και δεν έβρισκε την δύναμη ή να επιβληθεί των κομματικών του συμφερόντων και εξαγάγει την χώραν ως σκάφος εις τον λιμένα μέσω της μερωμένης θαλάσσης.
Αυτό επειδή είναι και επικίνδυνο, δεν θέλουν να πεθάνεις. Γενικώς η χούντα έκανε οικονομία στους θανάτους. Δεν ήθελε να προκύπτουν νεκροί. Σε μία εβδομάδα ακριβώς, περίπου, που με πήγανε στο νοσοκομείο, με φέρανε. Σε μία εβδομάδα λοιπόν που φαίνεται ότι εκρίνανε ότι μπορώ να συνεχιστεί τα βασανιστήρια, με ανεβάσαν ξανά για φάλαγγα, αλλά γλίγορα με λύσανε και μου είπανε τότε θα πάμε στο Διόνυσο. Το Διόνυσο ήταν ανώτερου επίπεδου τα βασανιστήρια, πιο συστηματικά, δεν σε αφήνει να κοιμηθείς, δεν σου λένε να φας, να πιεις νερό, τα γνωστά.
Ένοπλοι δυνάμεις της χώρας εκφράζουσε την απέτηση του ελληνικού λαού, κατήργησαν το πλήρωμα και ανέλαβαν την διακυβέρνηση της ΚΑΠ.
Όλοι αυτοί ήταν προδότες και καθάρματα και επίορκοι. Και οι λέξεις είναι βαριές, αλλά γι' αυτό τις χρησιμοποιώ. Ο λαός αντιστάθηκε. Όχι από την πρώτη μέρα και όχι όλοι μαζί. Αντιστάθηκαν οι δυνάμεις της αριστεράς, οι οποίες είχαν βιώσει στο πετσί τους το μεταπολεμικό παρακράτος και οι οποίες είχαν μια μεγάλη παράδοση αγώνων. Αντιστάθηκε η νεολαία και αντιστάθηκε και ένα κομμάτι μικρό του αστικού κόσμου, το οποίο δεν άντεχε την δικτατορία.
The colonels divided the opponents of them to two main categories. The communists, they were sent to islands with no people on the islands. They were only used for sending people to exile. And the other category was more mainstream politicians, Democrats. They were sent to different islands. Today are very touristic, but at the time they were also very isolated with few people, with very poor communications with the mainland.
There were thousands of people put in exile. There was torturing. There was persecution of people. There were people resisting honestly. plus the avant-garde was the Communist Party. That was not legal. But in 1968, it was inaugurated. We created in Greece, inside Greece, under their nose, the Communist Youth Organization, the CNE. The party started having organizations underground, of course, illegal, of course. So you see, there was a resistance that grew up in the population and ended up.
Βεβαίως η μουσική του Μίκη Θεοδωράκη και ο ίδιος ο Μίκης Θεοδωράκης με την πληθωρική του παρουσία και τη μεγάλη δημοφιλία που είχε αποτέλεσαν ένα έμβλημα και ένα λάβαρο και ένα συνθηματικό της αντίστασης. Αρκούσε να σφυρίξεις ένα τραγούδι του Θεοδωράκη και έδινες ένα μήνυμα στον διπλανό σου ότι εναντιώνεσαι στη Χούντα και αν το σφύριζε κι αυτός, ακόμη και αν ήταν ένα τραγούδι που μιλούσε για μια μυρτιά, ας πούμε, ή για ένα νησί, για ένα ακρογιάλι, ακόμη και αν δεν ήταν πολιτικό το τραγούδι, καταλάβαινες το μήνυμα.
The latest newsreel pictures from Athens underline the tragedy of a liberated capital still at war.
The 40s was the most turbulent decade of modern Greek history in the sense that we had a very tough occupation by German, Italian, and Bulgarian troops. And after the end of the occupation, there was no peace. There was a very short ceasefire between the two sides, the nationalist and the communist side. And in 1946, the Civil War started. It was all a matter of who did Greece belong to. Would Greece be accepted to be a communist country or a capitalist country of the West, as it was the wish of the Europeans, the British particularly, and the Americans?
Ono što je definitivno sada utvrđena kao činjenica jeste da je Komunistička partija Jugoslavije, odnosno nova vlast u Jugoslaviji na čelu sa Josipom Brozom Titom, pomagala grčke komuniste na svoju ruku. Kada su se u oktobru, neposredno pred oslobođenje i Atine i Beograda, u Moskvi sastali Churchill i Stalin, oni su se tokom jedne večere u noći između 9. i 10. oktobra dogovorili da podele Balkan. Prema tom dogovoru je Jugoslavija 50-50% podeljena između Sovjetskog saveza i Zapada, a Grčka je 90% pripala Zapadu, a samo 10% je pripala pod sovjetsku sferu uticaja.
Grčka ima jak pokret otpora, dakle njihova. Dakle, to počinje već praktično na samom početku okupacije. Postoji nekoliko tih grupa i veoma brzo će preovladati taj prokomunistički, dakle, veoma snažan grčki pokret otpora. Jugoslavija ima, dakle, tu svoju istoriju, dakle, otpora. U isto vreme i u jednoj i drugoj zemlji se vode i neka mali i veliki građanski ratovi.
Britain had not come to occupy Greece, nor to fight Greeks. We went there to help Greece consolidate her liberation.
90% pokreta otpora u Grčkoj bili su EAM i ELAS, koji su se nalazili pod direktnom kontrolom Komunističke partije Grčke, koja je opet bila deo Kominterne. Kod nas situacija baš i nije bila toliko jasna, ali su se dogovorom velikih sila oni pušteni niz vodu. U Grčku su se iskrcali Englezi, koji su vršili surove pogrome nad komunistima i nad levičarima, sarađivali sa krajnjom desnicom, čak i sa onim snagama koji su za vreme Drugog svjetskog rata direktno sarađivale sa okupatorom.
Everybody was in panic. I mean, those who had lost were in panic because they had lost, and those who had won were in panic because they were afraid that there was going to be another round in which they would lose.
But it's not the civil war itself that is at the origins of the junta. Greece was facing institutional trouble, a huge crisis of institutions since the First World War. First, it was this division between the supporters of Eleftherios Venizelos, the Prime Minister, and King Constantine, which sparked a very tense political polarization we call the national schism, in which really the Greek institutions ceased, at least at some moments, ceased to function. Then came, on top of that, the Civil War. So it was a country which was torn by crisis of institutions, by the crisis of the political system, and this evidently made the junta probable.
La puissance explosive des bombes atomiques stockées correspond à une tonne de dynamite par habitant. Attention!
And when in the 60s, apparently it seemed that the left was taking over again, a big part of the Greek military apparatus felt threatened, and that is why we ended up at the coup d'etat of 21st of April 1967.
But the junta of 1967 was not another case of a Greek military coup of the interwar years. I mean, in the interwar years, it was the leadership of the army that was doing the military coup, whereas in 1967 it was high-ranking officers, but not of the highest rank. It was really a clique, a group of extremist officers who took advantage of this big political crisis that I was talking about and simply hijacked the state.
Pukovnici koji su došli na vlast pučem 1967. godine su bili mladi poručnici ili kadeti 1936. godine kada je uvedena diktatura Metaksasa, jedna, ajde kažemo, ultranacionalistička diktatura sa tim nekim elementima koji vuku na fašizam. To sve ljudi veoma, kažemo, skromnog porekla, da recimo uvode reformu jezika, vraćaju onaj jezik ka Tarevusu, dakle, taj suvoparni, visokoparni, bolje rečeno, jezik teologije i prava. I onda pokušaju čak drže govore, pa to ispada onako smešno. Dakle, govore o Vizantiji, o obnovi Vizantije i tako dalje. To su sve anahronizmi koji pokazuju zapravo to jedno ideološko tumaranje, ali komponenta je bila da je jedan izraziti antikomunizam sa tom jednom antislovenskom notom.
In Greece in the 60s, there used to be what we call a holy trinity, which was the king, the palace, the army, and the Americans, but mainly the CIA. They were the three factors governing Greece. So the US was very involved here. The CIA had very, very close ties to a lot of the military junta people, the guys who organized the coup. I have in the book, in the Rape of Greek Democracy, a picture of them handing together, like 2 years before the coup. But my understanding is that there was no direct green light to go ahead with the coup. It was more of an orange light, meaning that the CIA, and especially the Greek-American CIA agents who were meeting with these junta people, told them, you know, if you go ahead and you do the military coup and you stop Papandreou from coming to power, the US will be okay. But, you know, we didn't tell you to go ahead with it.
Well, the Greek junta in 1967 was an unusual event that should not have occurred. I mean, Greece at that time was being stabilized as a member of the Western world. It was an associated member of the European community. It was a member of NATO. It should not have a military junta. Immediately after the imposition of the junta comes the Six-Day War, June 1967. The Soviet squadron, the 5th Escadra, is in the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean is the soft underbelly of NATO. The Americans did not want trouble with their southern flank. So that was the reason why in the end, they accepted junta. They accepted to cooperate with the junta, although they despised it.
We know now, I mean, that if the Northern Right would win the elections, the United States have given the green light for a kind of military coup with the participation of the king. So the king of the United States and the generals, they were organizing their own coup. They were taken by surprise by the coup of the colonels. That's the story. But after that, the United States tried to establish in the beginning a working relation with the dictatorship, and then they fully supported the dictatorship. There was also a problem because the vice president of the United States at the time was Spiro Agnew, a second generation Greek immigrant to the United States. And so that's also played a role. We had also Onassis who also supported the dictatorship. Onassis at the time was the big international tycoon, the richest man in the world.
We like very much to think of ourselves as, nations of resistance, nations of passion, nations that have been victims, and so on and so on. On the one hand, there has been resistance. There were people that resisted in Greece, resisted outside, people that left the Greek soil, refugees in different parts of the European countries, and so on and so on. Yet I have to say that the big part of the majority of the Greek public was pathetic during the dictatorship, was indifferent. The dictatorship would not have lasted 7 years if there was a massive resistance coming from the majority of the Greek people. The Greek people, to a certain extent, some of them, they were vocal against the dictatorship, here in Greece and in other countries of the in other countries of Europe, but the majority was not that vocal.
Αλέκος Παναγούλης είναι ένας θρύλος για την Ελλάδα, ένας άνθρωπος ο οποίος, όπως έγραψε σε ένα ποίημά του, ήθελε να νικήσει επειδή δεν μπορούσε να νικηθεί. Ήταν ένας άνθρωπος που αποφάσισε μόνος του και χωρίς κάποια ιδιαίτερη οργάνωση να κάνει μια εξεγερσιακή πράξη, σκοτώνοντας τον δικτάτορα Παπαδόπουλο, ανατινάζοντας το αυτοκίνητό του στον δρόμο προς το Σούνιο. Δεν ήταν καλά οργανωμένη η απόπειρά του, συνελήφθηκε και βασανίστηκε με τον χειρότερο τρόπο που έχει βασανιστεί άνθρωπος. Του κόβαν κομμάτια από το δέρμα του, του σβήναν αναμένα τσιγάρα πάνω του, τον αφήσαν άυπνο με βασανιστήρια επί 70 μέρες. Του περνούσαν πυρωμένη βελόνη στην ουρίθρα και την πύρωναν για να ομολογήσει τους συνεργάτες του. Και αυτός δεν λύγησε ποτέ. Και όταν ήρθαν οι εκπαιδευμένοι από τη CIA, οι βασανιστές που είχαν περάσει από το Βιετνάμ, όταν παρακολούθησαν το βασανισμό του Παναγούλη, είπαν στο διοικητή της ΕΣΑ, στον Ιωαννίδη, σκότωσέ τον γιατί αυτός δεν θα λυγίσει ποτέ. Είναι το 1 στο 1 εκατομμύριο που δεν λυγίζει. Ο Παναγούλης ενταφιάστηκε ζωντανός επί 5 χρόνια σε ένα κελί. Στη δίκη του είπε ότι ο καλύτερος επιθανάτιος ρόγχος, το ωραιότερο κύκνιο άσμα ενός αγωνιστή της δημοκρατίας είναι ο επιθανάτιος ρόγχος στα πολυβόλα μιας τυραννίας σαν και τη δική σας. Και έδειξε όλο το δικαστήριο, όλους τους στρατοδίκες.
He was sentenced to death, and in this prison here, he was waiting for his penalty to be executed. There were days, remaining for his execution. There was a huge international reaction by the personalities all over Europe asking not to be executed, and finally the dictator, in order to save face and for international public relations, he commuted the sentence to life in prison.
He is a myth, still is a myth. He was a very, very brave man, kind of wild, really adventurous, taking risks and all this. But he was kind of a lonely figure. He was not part of a, more general kind of movement. He's also a myth because, he died in a car accident after the junta fell. And he was also he was romantically involved with the famous Italian journalist, Oriana Fallaci. And, he lives on as a myth because even when he died, nobody believed that it was a pure car accident. But, back then, everybody thought that, somehow he had discovered some secret archives or something, and he was killed by some junta people or somebody else. But he's a legendary figure. He's a real myth that people respect, and, he's kind of the saint of the resistance, let's say,
Je suis venu en Europe pour témoigner devant l'opinion internationale. Mon témoignage sera long et pénible. Je témoignerai avec la parole, l'action et la musique. Mais je ne suis pas venu seulement pour témoigner. Je suis venu surtout pour lutter. Parce que je me suis voué à la lutte sacrée du peuple grec. Comme l'ont été les camarades de lutte qui sont tombés dans le combat.
Τη δεκαετία του 60 υπήρξε μία άνθηση των δημοκρατικών δυνάμεων, των δυνάμεων που είχαν βρεθεί στους ηττημένους του εμφυλίου, για να το πούμε έτσι. Τότε και με τη μουσική ως κυρίαρχο όργανο έκφρασης του λαού και με τη λογοτεχνία, αλλά και με την δυναμική αρθογραφία πολλών ανθρώπων, ο κόσμος έδειξε να χειραφετείται. Τότε τα τραγούδια του Μίκη Θοδωράκη, ας πούμε, απετέλεσαν ένα πολύ σημαντικό παράγοντα ενεργοποίησης του κόσμου, του πληθυσμού.
Teodorakis se veoma rano uključio u pokret otpora i već tada je bio hapšen i zatvaran za vreme Drugog svjetskog rata. Za vreme studija na pravnom fakultetu učlanio se u ELAS i imao čin kapetana u Grčkoj narodno-oslobodilačkoj vojsci. Odmah potom rata je bio interniran prvo na 2 ostrva i 1948. godine biva prebačen ovde na Makronisos. Međutim, pošto su mu prilikom torture 1949. godine polomili jednu ruku i jednu nogu, bio je prebačen sa ostrva i nastavio je svoju, oni su to zvali prevaspitavanje tada, rehabilitaciju u bolnici.
To je jedan veliki umetnik, ali u isto vreme čovjek koji je bio opsednut koliko svojom umetnošću, toliko političkom aktivizmom od svoje mladosti. Dakle, on je bio zatvaran u logoru Makronisos kao neko ko je podržavao grčku levicu. Odlazio je iz Grčke u znak protesta, posle završetka građanskog rata, pa je u Parizu, pa se vraćao, pa je hapšen. Ponovo je hapšen na početku diktature, on je čak pokušao da dobije azil u Jugoslovenskoj ambasadi, pa nije imao sreću. Ambasador tamo, Javorski, nije bio u to vreme u zgradi ambasade, već je bio neko od ovih nižih činovnika koji pomislio da je to neki provokator.
Ta vest je nekako došla do strane štampe koja je objavila to da je odbijen za jugoslovenski azil i onda je ambasador Javorski, koji očigledno on nije bio u toku sa tim šta radi vojni izaslanik i kakve greške pravi, morao da to pravda i da objašnjava. I dogovorili su se već tada da planiraju da poseti Beograd. Međutim, vrlo brzo posle toga on je prebačen na jedno drugo mesto i zabranjen mu je kontakt sa novinarima i sa diplomatama. I u jednom trenutku, kada hunta više nije znala šta će da radi sa Teodorakisom, ona ga je pustila da ode u inostranstvo, otišao u Pariz.
Vidim te između četiri stražara, čujem noćne straže pod prozorom. Čujem tvoje srce što udara tiho.
On je ovdje imao veliku podršku. Društvo kompozitora Jugoslavije organizuje pomoć. Snima se jedna posebna long play ploča sa pesmama koje su bile posvećene njemu i Grčkoj. Prvu posetu posle lečenja kratkog jedno mesec i po dana u Parizu koji je učinio, bila je poseta Beogradu gde ga je Tito primio.
Lastama morskim prekrivenu hri.
For young people to live in a dictatorship, it was very, very hard. It was, it was very, very unpleasant. You could not live like that, because we had no possibility to listen the music we wanted. For instance, the music of Mikis Theodorakis. Theodorakis was in exile, and his songs were completely forbidden. If you would sing a song in a tavern, you would be arrested.
All around Europe and in the States, in the United States, a very profound wave of youth movements were developing. We had exactly the same, and this youth movement was the part of freedom we lived in these years, and on the other side, there was the repression. So the clash was inevitable.
In 1972, they drafted in the army 52 students. They were leaders in different parts of the country of the protest movement. I was among the 52. And then as a reaction to the drafting of the activist students, there was the big occupation of the School of Law in downtown Athens, which was the first very political action. In the summer of '73, Papadopoulos tried to calm things by saying that we will have a kind of democratization, liberalization.
Oh, I'll say that I came to recruit, and I'll come back with you. And then we'll come to practice tomorrow and say we're coming to recruit.
I think that the youth that grew up during the junta, they were very influenced by the '68 movement in France, but also by all the American student movements. When Strawberry Statement, the famous film, came to Greece, all the cinemas were full, with people clapping and singing. It was Bob Dylan, John Baez, and all that. And I think there was a lot of romanticism, back then, in '73, when these people, basically revolted. It was a very scary thing. A lot of them were tortured, they went to prison, some of them were killed. So I would say that, the one moment that really encapsulates the junta and the resistance is that famous scene where the tank enters the gate of the Polytechnic School. I think that's, all the mythology, all the history about the junta, the resistance is captured in that one picture.
It was a good day of November, a very shiny day of November, that's true. And it was good to be there. So, the first day and the half of the second, that means the 15th and the 14th and the 15th of November, the main, let's say, political forces were small leftist groups with anarchists, and the whole situation was a little bit confused. Second day, organized in socialist and communist parties groups of students and independent groups of students cooperating with these groups of organizing in the Communist Party, the Communists of Interior, PASOK was emerging as a political force then, have taken control. They changed the whole political, let's say, dimension of the insurrection. And the target was the junta of the colonies, the democracy, the freedom, and the restoration of a parliamentary democratic regime. The main difference between the first and the second day was that the people was following the first day with some hesitation, with some, let's say, reticence, but the second day with a target, a political target, clear and unifying the whole collectivity, it was like a miracle.
The Polytechnic school became the center of all the protest of all the democratic people. They all came around the Polytechnic school. The Polytechnic school was closed because there were police outside, and then inside the students were afraid of the police entering with violence, because that was happened several times before. So the doors were closed.
From the 16th afternoon and then, there was big fights all around the Polytechnic school with injured, with dead people, and we knew that the situation has worsened very, very soon. So we learned that a part of the agenda will crush Polytechnic with tanks. We knew that. And we had to face or this, let's say, brutal force, unarmed, absolutely unarmed. We heard the noise of the tanks coming from Alexandra Street and then Patission. It was a moment of silence. Everybody inside, more than 3,000-4,000 students, knew that the crucial moment has arrived. They knew that the situation was really dramatic, tragic, I would say. So, in a sense, for 5 minutes more or less, everyone has started to think about what he will do. This 5-moment silence was probably one of the most, let's say, crucial moments of the Polytechnic. It was a moment of the decision to be there, defending values, ideas, identities, solidarity with others, and so on.
Before sending the tank, there were snipers around the Polytechnic School, and they would shoot the people. They would shoot the people to frighten the people. There were a lot of people killed, but most of them were killed or shot outside the Polytechnic School.
The tanks entered the school, we spread under the pressure of the police. A lot of them were arrested. I wasn't. I was in a building nearby Polytechnic. And Saturday morning, the 17th of November, I tried to escape this entangled situation.
Protest continued the next day. So some of the people were killed next day after the invasion of the tank.
I was searched. Before that, I was for three months and a half prisoner of the military police in Eate-Sab. I was tortured and so, and I couldn't be captured again because I was risking my life. So I didn't participate in the manifestation of Saturday morning. And for 9 months, I was in a clandestine situation.
After the uprising of the Polytechnic School, Papadopoulos was finished because there was bloodshed. And he has been replaced by another officer who was more hardliner than Papadopoulos, if that is possible, but it was. And at that period, the 9 months after Papadopoulos' replacement, up to the fall of the dictatorship, they were very, very tough. A very, very tough period. People were sent to exile for nothing.
Nobody in Greece knew who this guy was. We called him the invisible dictator because he was the head of the military police. He was not the president, the prime minister, or anything. He would go around with a military jeep in a simple uniform, a brigadier uniform. And we noticed after he got taken over, we all knew his name, but nobody had seen a picture. And we saw this guy who was coming and going to our building, visiting his sister and all this, and had no clue. And then a relative of us came from the States, and there was a Newsweek magazine which had his picture. And they said in the caption, the invisible dictator of Greece. So I remember my father, who was listening to BBC, got really scared, turned the radio off, and said, that guy upstairs is the dictator.
The last version of the junta, it is the so-called Ioannidis junta, from the name of Dimitrios Ioannidis, the head of the military police, who dominated that last phase. This last version of the Greek junta, facing economic trouble and increasing also protest, they perhaps decided that they needed a triumph on a national issue, which was Cyprus, in order to stabilize their regime.
Cyprus was a very important thing for Greece since the 60s. There was a huge tension because the Greek military believed that Cyprus should be part of Greece. They believed in what they called enosis, the unification of Greece with. But Makarios, who was the leader of Cyprus, was a very dependent kind of person. He was very protective of an independent Cyprus, which was not part of NATO. It was kind of very dependent, and critical of the West, sometimes. And he wanted to protect his own, let's say, power. When the junta actually came to power, there was a lot of tension between Papadopoulos and Makarios. But I think Papadopoulos was kind of much more shrewd in the way he dealt with it. So he never rocked the boat too much because he was always worried that the Turks were going to intervene. I think what happens in '74 is basically another dictator comes to power. He's a guy who is much more parochial in his view. He doesn't pick the foreigners except for very low CIA Greek-American guys. And he thinks this is his opportunity to kick Makarios out of Cyprus, because Makarios had kicked him out of Cyprus as a Greek military officer back in the 60s. So this was his revenge, let's say.
They decided to topple Archbishop Makarios, the president of Cyprus, with a military coup. The coup was successful, Makarios was toppled, but of course gave the pretext to Turkey to invade Cyprus.
The morning of July 20th, and BBC is like having footage of, Turkish landing crafts filled with soldiers. The intelligence people call him up and say, these guys are moving. He said, no, nothing's going to happen. Don't worry about it. So I think he was really blinded by some U.S. assurances, and he was blinded by his own nationalism and his obsession against Makarios. So he wakes up, on the 20th, the whole thing collapses, basically. He gets very angry at the Americans. He threatens to go to war with Turkey. And he gives two instructions. There's an actually war council on that day. He gives two very direct instructions. One is declare enosis with Cyprus, the unification. Doesn't happen. His own government doesn't do that. And the second is he gives orders for the Greek military to attack the Turkish landing craft in Cyprus. And this didn't happen. The planes didn't take off, the submarines didn't go there. The Americans played a huge role in this. The CIA made sure to stop the generals from actually implementing these orders. And then the whole place basically collapses. And the generals decide, this is it, we're not going to be blamed for this. So they blame him. He was only a brigadier. He was the head of the military police, nothing else. And he becomes kind of the scapegoat. And then, of course, they decide to bring back Karamanlis and so on.
This was a compromise, let's be honest. It was a compromise. And I think that it was a relief, but it was an expected relief. It was the end, it rotten down. The junta was rotten down in 7 years. It went down like fruits that stay more in a tree than they should stay. It wasn't, it was a poisonous fruit that went down.
I remember that my father, a young doctor back then, he was asked to join the military again, but it was like, it was a scandal. It was, everything was collapsing. So my father left for 3 days. I remember in the summer, we were in our village. And then after 3-4 days, my father came back with one rabbit. So he said, this is the result of my presence to the Greek army. So it was a complete bordello these years. I don't know, you can say it, whatever. It was an administrative nightmare. So the state was dying.
junta fell by selling out Cyprus. It was a tragedy that costed a whole state to be cut in two. And it's still going on. The tragedy is not solved in Cyprus.
A federal government would be established together with two constituent states. Cyprus would be a full member of the European Union based upon the rule of law, democracy, and respect for human rights.
We still have a Cyprus divided. They even took Cyprus as it was, divided, occupied in the north, occupied by foreign powers, and they put it in the European Union to solve the problem, and the problem is not solved, my dear.
When we learned that the dictatorship was falling and they were ready to give the power back to the people, to the politicians, to the Democrats, we left the hiding and we just went, all of us, to the main square of Athens, the Constitution Square, the Syntagma Square.
I mean, that was an amazing day. You know, we went down with my father, I remember, and other people downtown Athens. There were millions of people in the streets celebrating, you know, flags everywhere. Real joy, real anger for Cyprus, but also real joy for what had happened.
Ako pogledamo jugoslovensku štampu istog vremena, vidjet ćemo da je to bilo dočekano sa velikim oduševljenjem, da kažem, i optimizmom. I to je jedna opšta ocena bila da je posle tih 7 godina, dakle, te poslednje vojne diktature u Evropi, dakle, u naše doba, nekako stavljena tačka na taj tip, da kažemo, diktature. Ono što je za Jugoslaviju bilo važno, to je, dakle, da se to završava, taj period završava u jednoj državi koja je bila susedna, s kojom smo imali duge istorijske, ekonomske i svake druge veze. Dakle, pad diktature i smena vlasti je bilo nešto što je jugoslovenska javnost dočekala sa velikim oduševljenjem.
United States shall insist on the strict maintenance of the ceasefire on Cyprus. Second, the imperative and urgent need is to begin negotiations. Third, we will continue to support efforts to bring the parties to the negotiating table. Fourth, the United States will play any role requested by the parties. We are also prepared to support the able efforts of the British Foreign Secretary Callaghan in this regard. Fifth, in these negotiations, we believe it will be necessary for Turkey, as the stronger power on the ground, to display flexibility
Yugoslavia, as a leading member of the non-aligned movement, of course, was very much against the Turkish invasion of Cyprus. Cyprus was a member of the non-aligned movement. But also what we do see is that Yugoslavia played a role, a very positive role. Yugoslavia and Josip Broz Tito seemed to actively try to help the Greek transition to democracy. For example, the Yugoslav foreign minister, Milos Minic, is the first foreign statesman who visits Athens in the summer, very summer of 1974, immediately after the transition to democracy. And there's another visit by Minic, I think in February. There's a new Greek-Yugoslav agreement on the use of the port of Thessaloniki, again, February 1975. I think the understanding of both Tito and Karamanlis was that the two countries were strategic partners in the Balkans. And Karamanlis at that time wanted to initiate a multilateral Balkan cooperation.
On the 50 years of the restoration of Greek democracy. We did a poll for the conference. So what was interesting is that the younger people, the people who had not lived through the first years after the junta, have no memory of it, they were kind of okay with it. I mean, they were critical, of course, but they were much more distant, about what happened then. And they were also very distant from the idea of democracy. I mean, democracy was not as important to them as it was to the older people who knew what junta was like. And for me, that was a scary thing, because I realized that this generation that, they were never deprived of democracy. They never had to fight for it. It was kind of a given. They can be much more upset about it, and they can be much more sort of blasé about the junta. And that's something that we have to really think about. And in my opinion, we have a responsibility, through documentaries, books, and so on, to basically reach out to the younger generation and explain to them, what really happened then. That, we shouldn't have a romantic idea that it was kind of a soft junta, or that the economy was doing well, or, that it was okay, it wasn't that bad. Because there is some of that creeping up, I'm afraid. When I look around, and democracy is not a given even in Europe in some places, not even in the US sometimes. People in the Western world, sometimes they value much more what democracy brings to the table. And when they're not happy with it, and they have every right not to be, with the cost of living being what it is and all that, then they get upset at democracy, because they say democracy doesn't deliver the goods for me. And so why is democracy important if it cannot, guarantee me a better future for my kids, or, a better kind of life?
We live in a period of crisis inside another. So, first, economic crisis. Second, refugee migration crisis. Third, COVID crisis. Fourth, energy crisis. Fifth, health crisis. Sixth, geopolitical crisis, security crisis. So now all this is gathering around Europe, and what you see is that people, they feel sick with their political elites. We see the far right progressing, and we see the far right progressing not in the usual suspects, because the Western Europeans like to blame Hungary, Serbia, Croatia, the easy ones to blame about the extreme right. You see this happening in the best families, as we say here. You see Austria, you see France, you see Italy, and you'll see Germany.
I find also interesting in our times is that, the kind of coups that you have now in Europe or other places, they're not military coups. I mean, they're not guys wearing uniforms. They're guys wearing suits and ties. And they play around, with our institutions, with our values and so on. And they get away because it's not, it's not as obvious, what's really happening.
And the idea of some people of the extreme right is they are playing a role or even controlling the present, is to control the past. They tried to minimize the importance of the Polytechnic uprising and the revolt uprising the 2 years before of the dictatorship. Greek photographers, they took pictures of the tank entering the Polytechnic school. Without the pictures, those pictures are still keeping the story very much alive, and you have 50 years after a huge demonstration in the anniversary of the uprising. The memories are fading, and it's very important to keep the memories alive, because who controls the past controls the future.
μέσα στα βουνά, μου πρώτο μας τώρα, με κλείσες μες στη θάλασσα. Μου πρώτο μας τώρα, με κλείσες μέσα στα βουνά, μου πρώτο μας τώρα, με κλείσες μες στη θάλασσα. Άρθηκε να απομάκους το σώμα του μαγιού,